movements as well. When you look at the Romantic era, when you look at the Victorian period, when we start to see the beginning of the vegetarian movements, you also see that there's a strong connection with pro-women's movements at the same time as well, and an articulation of that as well. So my sense of the two belonging together from my personal journey is absolutely reflected in how we see the history of both of these areas of activism, I guess. And it makes perfect sense, and I think that probably the others may talk a little bit more about this as well. That the commodification of animals for particularly for food disproportionately is about the commodification of female reproductive functions. It's about perpetual cycles of impregnation, pregnancy, lactation, forced separation from between mothers and newborns. That's what the animal food industry disproportionately is about. It's about issues to do with being female and how that is commodified. So in the work that I do, I look at how this is communicated to us as humans through these representations in culture, those kinds of cultural artefacts that I described to you before, through language, through imagery, through all the things that I talked about before. And that kind of shows us how there are very similar sorts of processes in how animals and women are transformed or reduced from whole, unique, wonderful individuals into parts that are there for the gaze, the consumption, the purposes of those who hold power over us. That there are similarities in those processes of how we as whole individuals become bits and referred to in bits, like an animal, a piece of meat, all of these elements that we become. Now, saying that there are similarities in those processes is not saying that that the outcomes are comparable. I'm not saying that the end product is comparable. And in fact, making those comparisons between the end product, like referring to women as pieces of meat, is one of the processes of our oppression as women, and it's using animals as a vehicle in order to mobilise that. So animals as well, we see through looking at these representations, these cultural artefacts, are a way in which oppressive and marginalising identities to do with gender, to do with sexuality, to do with ethnicity, to do with age, to do with disability. They're one of the ways in which we construct those stories. Animals are very often used to create identities about us, because we have categories of different kinds of animals, pets, pests, farmed animals, and we associate characteristics according to those categories of animals with characteristics that are appropriate for certain groups according to gender, age, sexuality, ethnicity. It's detrimental to us humans who are identified in those ways, but it's even more harmful to the animals that we are using in order to communicate some of those things. If you think about the example of, your traditional Christmas dinner or your holiday dinner that you have, the Christmas turkey, all of the gendered and social expectations to do also with age, family relationships, about, who cooks, who carves, who gets the dark meat, who gets the white meat, who gets the leg, who gets the breast. All of these kind of social processes are bound up in the representation we have through these social rituals. It's not great for us, it's not great for those marginalised groups that we belong to, but it's really bad news for the turkey. We're using them as a way in which we create these oppressive and marginalised identities as well. So the work that I do with Matthew, largely, who's sitting over in the corner, about all of these artefacts, very often as they relate to childhood, try to unpick some of those stories about these kinds of things. You may have seen in the last week or so news stories about shoes, Clark's shoes for girls, and how they inhibit physicality in children, because you can't run in the school shoes that are marketed for girls, you can't run around the playground in them terribly well. We've looked at clothing and how representations, pictures, imagery of animals on clothing are one of the ways in which we create gendered identities. If you look, as we did, if you look at clothing catalogues, Boys' clothing is overwhelmingly has machinery and wild animals on them. Unbounded identities, bugs, stuff, go out there. The imagery on girls' clothing is cottage gardens, it's butterflies, it's rabbits, these sorts of things. So all of those things that probably we knew about colour and those kinds of things, actually animals are a vehicle in which we create these gendered identities as well. So an awful lot of the work that we do is unpicking and looking at some of these. Once you start to see it, and do it now, have a look at things and go and watch films and go, oh, she's being identified as a particular kind of middle-aged single woman because she's crazy cat lady. They're using a cat to communicate that. Once you start to see it, you can't unsee it, and it's always there. I'm probably pushing my time right now, aren't I? So
it's still got a bit of time, that's fine. You've still got a bit of time.
Yeah, seems like a good point to hand on.
Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. So,
I've been vegan for 4.5 years now. I was really lucky because I was raised in a vegetarian household, also quite a feminist household in probably a very, not in a direct way, but the way my mum raised me, she didn't, I think I just had it in my head from a young age, like I am a feminist, although it wasn't until in the past few years that I think I became an active feminist, like actively in just day-to-day life being aware of things. For me, veganism came first, like my sort of journey of going from vegetarian to vegan, and then becoming more active in feminist ways, and then suddenly realising, wow, these two things are so interlinked, and made me go, God, people need to know this. The big thing for me, and I'll just sort of talk at just a few facts about what happens in the dairy industry. I won't go into horrific too much detail or anything, but I think it does need to be just sort of bullet pointed. Basically, a female cow naturally will live to 20 to 30 years. In a dairy cow will only live to about 5, and that process, a cow only produces milk after a 9-month pregnancy, just like a human. And when that calf is born from that female cow, the calf will be immediately taken from the mother within a day, maybe 2 days if they're lucky. That calf will be taken from the mother, and the mother will cry and pine and, for her baby, just as any other creatures, just as a woman would cry if her baby was taken from her. Now, the reason that baby, of course, is taken is so that humans can consume the milk that was designed for the calf. So then, as soon as she's given birth and she's then starting to be milked, she will be re-impregnated, so which means that she will be both pregnant and being milked at the same time, and this will happen repeatedly throughout her short life. So if she lives for 5 years, she's probably going to have 45 babies that she will not get to mother, not get to nurture. They will be taken from her. And I've heard people who have had babies, women, and they've said that relation, the sort of realisation of like, oh my God, that's my baby, and that is what's happening to these creatures on these mothers on a daily basis by the thousands, and that is what makes them, like, that's what's made them actually choose to give up milk and dairy. To put it into perspective, can you imagine if female girls were being impregnated shortly after their first period, to have their babies taken from them continuously, to then be killed by about 25? Because what happens to the dairy cow is her body will give up, like the strain on her body after about 5 years, and she won't be able to take it anymore. She'll be killed, and she will be sold for cheap meat products, products such as pastries, sausages, and baby food, which is horrendous. The whole thing is, part of feminism is that women have fought to regain control of our bodies. We for so long have been seen as property of men. We're property of our father, and then we marry, and then we're property of the husband. Of course, now that is an outdated thing now, but in a lot of cultures, unfortunately, it is still happening. And this is what we had fought so hard to come away from that and to regain our own control. So I don't see why, if we fought so strongly and feel so strongly for women's rights to our bodies, then I think we should feel the same for a cow's rights and any other animal's rights to their body. Male and female creatures, of course. Another thing to mention is dairy products are one of the number one causes for girls actually going into early onset puberty. So what happens, this milk that is made from a cow it's got proteins in it, and these proteins are designed to make the calf grow quickly and give all the proteins that they need. When a human consumes that milk, those proteins trigger a hormone in our body called IGF-1, which stands for insulin-like growth factor, which is also the hormone that has been linked to a lot of types of cancer. And it's then also linked to early onset puberty. So we're living in this world, we're growing up in schools and having adverts bombarded at us saying dairy products are, this is where you get calcium from, eat dairy, dairy's healthy, da 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 da. And it's so wrong because we're being told this misinformation when actually this product is really bad for us and actually has the ability to change our body's natural rate of development. That is what it has the ability to do. And girls are going into starting their periods by ages 9 and 10 and becoming more and more common, which just isn't right. It's not natural. How am I doing?
Yeah,
doing all right?
yeah.
I mean, the problem is we call it an industry. So cows and chickens and pigs, the way animals, there is a farming industry. And these animals are being seen as products. They're not being seen as living sentient beings. And they're not being seen as mothers. They're not being seen as children or babies. They're being seen, but that's what they are. And they're not being seen as that by this industry. They're just a product for our consumption. Again, it's like what you were saying with women being seen as parts of meat. It's not. It's taking our identity away, and it's taking the animal's identity away as well. I'll just end on a really nice quote by Alice Walker. She's an amazing feminist author. She wrote The Colour Purple, and it says, "The animals of this world exist for their own reasons. They were not made for humans any more than black people were made for whites or women for men." And for me, that sums it up. And the bottom line is, if you consider yourself a feminist, I think you just need to be at least aware of these issues so you can then make informed choices about what you buy in the supermarket, because we have the power to choose not to support this industry and not to support this oppression. We have that power simply by what we buy in the supermarket.
Thinking about it, so lucky in some ways, but then it wasn't until I went to uni that actually I went vegan, and then I also, I think became a feminist, and also became pro-intersectionist and was reading about all these other important gender theories and race theories and other theories that were really important to developing me politically. And I think that this kind of all started by joining various societies. So at one point at my university I was president of the Vegetarian Vegan Society, and I was vice president of the Feminist Society, and I was doing a talk on veganism at the Feminist Society, and I was doing a talk on intersectionality at the Vegan Society, and trying to sort of link them together in my own way. I think the kind of linking just really happened, especially within the Feminist Society, when I was going and we were talking about intersectionality and how everything is linked, and we then added sort of species to the board, which was a bit controversial among some people, because obviously intersectionality is a theory. It's about human experience, and can it really be applied to animals? Because a lot of it is about lived experience and about people overcoming their own oppression through their lived experience. So how do animals really fit into it? And so I think when I was actually doing my undergraduate dissertation, I instead used Patricia Hill Collins' matrix of domination idea, which is it's kind of like developed from intersectionality theory, but matrix of domination is all about how the way in which different oppressions are linked under a matrix of domination. So it has got the focus on this experience as well, but I think the term can be applied as a whole to include animals too, in the way in which humans oppress them. And again, it's all linked, I think, to how humans, the kind of rational white male of the Enlightenment is the Western, is seen as the embodiment of rationality, the perfect, and then you get further and further away. So you might get people of colour and women, and then obviously women of colour even further away from the idea of rationality and humanity, and until you get animality, and then obviously that's why humans are, to be oppressed can be, they're making someone seem like an animal, but then animals themselves, like, are kind of just over there, they're the base, they're what no one ever wants to be. And obviously this isn't saying that animals have the worst lot of it, because obviously everyone has terrible experiences living under the worlds that we do, but it's just interesting to see how the Enlightenment theory and beyond and white Western thought has kind of, bases the animal, and then we're all trying to drag ourselves up to this perfect white male thought. And so that was a lot about what my dissertation was on, really. So that's really how I really got to grips with my veganism and feminism, was through this dissertation, and even more through my next dissertation from a master's, where I look at women and cows and the mechanization of milk, coming into, but first of all, really the sexualization of milk as well. And do people know the phrase, why buy the cow when you get the milk for free? So yeah, it's going to be looking a bit at that phrase, which actually started in the 1600s, which kind of means, why would you have a wife if you can have sex with a woman, without marrying her, without buying her? And so there are a lot of links, I think, to be explored between, women and animals within that. Unfortunately, my master's dissertation, I won't do too much, and I won't have as much room for exploration of other theories within intersectionality and other oppressions, but on my undergraduate one, I managed to link lots of ways in which animal organisations use women's bodies, particularly women's of colour's bodies, to make certain points which are not, I don't think, which is wrong, and to equate these things and to use women's bodies in this instrumental way in order to try and turn people vegan. And I think that we should all be aware of that in our own activism, and we should never try to compromise our principles or our morals to try and get someone to go vegan or to try and get someone to be a feminist. And I think that is kind of what I want to end on, really, just because I think that's an important thing to think about. Like, messages we can get out to people without compromising other intersections and other oppressions.
Wow, thank you. 3 very different views in terms of journey of how they've got to their feminism and also veganism, yeah? So I hope you found that really interesting. I did. It was like, okay, very interesting, especially around the milk.
Oh yeah? Is that some things you didn't know?
There's some stuff I knew, but not all of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, wow, okay, it does make you really think about, okay, what are we actually putting in our bodies, as I was saying earlier. Okay, so now this is your opportunity to ask a question. A really burning question, I'm sure. Well, okay, great. So if you want to just say your name.
My name's Rahni. I don't want to lower the tone, but let's talk about money and economics. And if we think about spreading ideas, if you talk to someone about feminism and they may make some changes in their lifestyle or the way they conduct themselves, there's no cost to it. It's accessible, whatever your social class, whether you're working or not working, or you can educate yourself if you're not educated. Similarly, if in terms of vegetarianism, whatever people's economic resources, it's generally speaking cheaper in the current culture and society that we live in for somebody to become a vegetarian. If they're badly off and they've got time, they can soak pulses and so on. And if you need convenience food, you can buy tinned beans. And there are many ways that, generally speaking, most even meat eaters, if they're on a budget, they would eat more vegetarian. Whereas, especially once you have children, being a vegan and eating a nutritious diet is much more expensive than being a vegetarian. How do we then spread these ideas without it being a very privileged set of people, mostly without children or younger? Okay. How can you persuade somebody that it's worth them on a limited income?
Okay, thank you for that.
It's really, I actually had this conversation with someone literally yesterday, because they said about it kind of becomes a class issue, because like you said, it can be it's seen as a more privileged thing. It's how I personally don't think it's expensive to live on a vegan diet.
I'd say 75p per litre for organic milk in Waitrose or Tesco, and it's at least £1 plus on special offer to get any kind of vegan milk substitute. Just a basic thing.
Yeah, I suppose there's so much, but on the other hand, then meat products can be expensive, and meat and fish
but
and cheese.
Comparing with being a vegetarian because vegetarianism is culturally more common, I'd say.
Yeah.
You can get 60p value soy milk from the supermarkets, but I do
Which
take your point.
supermarkets in Hackney?
In Hackney, I live in Hackney, unfortunately. I live up north.
Aldi's got like 60, 70p soy milk.
And where is Aldi? And how are mothers and fathers going to travel over there?
No, I do see your point, because I know that veganism can be inaccessible for a lot of people, especially if you're not in the right area or food desert, and I know that it's a massive issue. And then the only way that we can do is, for us as vegans, particularly more privileged people, is to campaign for there to be more accessibility, for it to be in every shop and for it to be cheap, and for veganism not to be seen as some luxury fad, but for it to be seen as essential.
When you look at certain vegan products that are coming out now, you have like vegan ice creams, vegan cheeses, they are luxury products, and yes, they can be expensive, but when you look at the absolute basics of what we need to live on a healthy diet, you need grains, you need beans, you need vegetables, so you can get all your protein, all your nutritional needs from that. So you can buy rice, couscous, tinned beans and vegetables, and I can live on a healthy diet of probably £15 a week shopping.
But for a family,
I mean,
with the time to look after kids out, just that, because youth is an aspect of privilege, isn't it? Or youth where you've not yet had your kids. Sorry.
Yeah. No, but thank you. It's a really interesting point, because there are issues around veganism in terms of cost.
Actually, I forgot to mention, on the cards that's on the chair, we've got a vegan recipe club, and part of that website has things like shopping vegan on a budget and shopping lists and stuff like that. So we do have really good information on the website.
Thank you.
I think Sophie just said kind of what I was going to say. You guys are discussing the prices of milk, but when I was in university, actually the first thing that I gave up when I was going vegan was dairy milk, because when my flatmates would like steal it, and I was like, okay, this is so annoying, and I didn't buy it. The concept of buying non-dairy didn't like occur to me. So I just have like porridge with water and like
would
a
you
ripe
bring your
banana.
kids up on that?
And it tastes good, honestly. It's really good for you. Like oats have loads of fiber, and like they get all the cholesterol. I mean, there's no cholesterol in the vegan diet anyway. And I wouldn't compromise like my child's health with like eggs and milk. Like really, that's like worse than meat in my opinion. So there's like no
But to
nutritional
substitute
content.
protein, if you actually really think
There's
about it, it
cholesterol.
is expensive.
You can get protein from like so many other sources. Also, protein isn't as important as you think it is. Like we're brainwashed by
I
society.
don't think that's going to persuade parents to go vegan if you tell them not to get their
Can
kids
we
protein.
have questions? Yeah? If there's any, but thank you for that. Yeah? Is there any? Yeah?
Your question where you started was the panel was feminism, how your journey to feminism and veganism. It's more a comment I want to make, because you're here for Vegan Society and you're here for Viva. The quotes you used, so you used Alice Walker's quote, and where you're talking also about intersectionality as well. I'd like to see the Vegan Society and Viva embrace more publicly intersectionality.
Me too.
It's more comment I want to make, because that's the question you've asked.
Yeah.
That's what I'd like to see, more of that, because, and also I can relate that back to that lady's question there. If you do that, then that also partly answers her question there. How do you get people involved?
Yeah, I would.
And then you need to be more local.
I would, obviously my time at Vegan Society has come to an end, and while I was there, I tried to institute this pro-intersectional policy with 1 or 2 others, which you actually have up on the FAQs on our website. And I really hope that people will try to push that forward. Unfortunately, the structure of any organisation is that it's run by trustees who constantly change, and it's hard to get things approved further up the hierarchy that you go. And and like while doing the social media, we try and put things on, obviously, but I didn't think it was ever enough. And I take your point, and I wish there was more that I had done or that the organisation would do. But now as a member, I feel like I have more freedom to campaign to get them to do that, because now I'm a member now, not a staff member. And so if you're a member of the Vegan Society as well, you can contact them on info@vegansociety.com and say, hey, you have this pro-intersectional policy on your website, but I didn't see you instituting it enough, can you do this, can you do that? And then I'm going to do this as well, and I think it's important because the staff changes so much that it's very hard to get certain things in place. People ask for it, then the people at the top will have to listen.
I think one of the difficulties that there is in organisations where there is an identity about that it's, you know, that they're organisations to do with veganism is that very often there's a feeling within those organisations or membership within those organisations that that's what the activities should be about. And I'm sure if you go onto the social media sites of both of these organisations, whenever they do raise issues like this, you get people going, "Oh, it's supposed to be about the animals, why are you talking about feminism?" And it's one of the real challenges in trying to introduce that intersectional approach into an organisation that has an identity with only ostensibly the front of house identity is to do with one of those entangled oppressions. It can be really difficult to get people to see that actually all of these other entangled oppressions are just as important and are part of this thing that's brought you through the door, this identity of veganism. And there can be resistance from within those the membership of those organisations in order to push those forward. I mean, I'm absolutely with everybody here in terms of the importance of recognising just how entwined all of those things are. But I think that sometimes that can be a real problem, a real barrier to do.
Because just coming back to the questions of feminism and veganism, for some of us here, our journey into feminism comes from a very different background. So for me, it was from violence. That's my introduction to feminism. Veganism came second because I can see the connection between what I went through as a young girl and the animals. So that's what I'm saying. The message is pushed through all those societies.
Yeah.
You'll bring in all the
when I started Viva and I started doing talks at festivals, and I basically went to my boss and I said, look, I want to do a talk on vegans and feminism because I think it's a topic that's not talked about ever. I've never seen any vegan festival have a programme with this subject. And she sort of was like a little bit hesitant at first and she said, but you know what, trial it, write a talk, do it, test it out on me, we'll trial it at a festival and if it's popular and then yeah, well, let's go for it and we'll do it at once. And I just titled it What's Feminism Got to Do With It? And I trialled it the first time in Nottingham and I've done it twice since then and it's been a full house but all 3 times and it's been like a really overwhelming response, which was great. And it's just like really like people say to me afterwards like, I'm so pleased people are finally talking about this. And having that, because it's at vegan festivals, you'll have loads of speakers talking about veganism, and that's great. But half the time you're just preaching to the converted, and it's nice for them to have a different opinion. Or you might get people coming to it who aren't necessarily vegan, who of course are interested on the feminist side, and that's really nice. Yeah, nice one.
Thank you. A question here?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to kind of piggyback off some of those things. One thing that hasn't come up a lot, that does come up a bit, is about some of the issues, I guess, that's happening within mainstream veganism, which for me is a big concern I have right now, and I'm seeing, in terms of a huge push of anti-intersectionality. So there's a lot of examples right now, like there's been a huge blow up in London Vegans group, if anyone's in that group, they probably know what I'm talking about. There was also like a leader of a major animal rights group in the US who was recently at like the Charlottesville march and was like proudly saying her name and everything. And a lot of this seems to be coming from the stance that the #1 goal we should have is getting as many people to go vegan as possible. And that's all that matters. And it doesn't really matter how we do that. And obviously that's not the same. Not all of us do the things that certain organizations do, if you all know what I'm talking about. But the idea that it doesn't really matter who it is as long as they go vegan, that's the goal. And that's causing a lot of issues, and it's turning a lot of people off of veganism, and it's making people feel unsafe in vegan communities, and it's causing so much cultural appropriation that it's absolutely ridiculous. But for me, this is like a huge issue I'm seeing as someone who's working to like help make more people vegan, help support vegan communities, is, what kind of community is this? Is this a community we want to be supporting? Is this an inclusive community? So for instance, I help with a group called Intersectional London Vegans. Maybe some people are in it. We're having an event on the 12th of September, so you should join our group. But basically, for me, who's doing research about promoting veganism, this is, for me, my biggest concern, because I came into doing my research and into what I'm doing because I'm passionate about veganism and social justice issues, and now I'm feeling kind of like, am I passionate about the vegan movement anymore? I'm feeling kind of fed up with the mainstream vegan movement when it's seen that pro-intersectionality is the division, and it's not. It's acknowledging divisions that already exist and trying to heal that. So I'd be interested to hear about mean, your thoughts on those things and what more can be done within your organizations and your work, and how we can kind of try to help address those problems.
I think that one of the things in another bit of the work that I do with Matthew, we've looked at a lot, and he's worked on it more than I have. Don't want to steal his thunder on it. But, on the writings of the early organised vegan movement, so the beginnings of the vegan society, and when you look at the people who were making the case for veganism as veganism and then invented new word and all of this sort of stuff, it had what we would recognise as a very strong pro-intersectional flavour. It was not just about not using animal products. It was a much broader. It had and very clearly it was connected to broader social justice ideas and issues. And if you go back through, and it's all archived on the Vegan Society website now, and all the old magazines and stuff. If you go back through those early writings from the 1940s, you get that really clearly. And I don't know what the answer is in terms of resisting the move away from that. We kind of get sometimes made to feel as sort of pro-intersectional vegans that that's a new twist on veganism. And it's not at all. It was there from the very beginning of when we started to use the terminology and the word veganism as well. And it's you know, it's about holding on to that and recognising it has always been about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. Like, talking about what to do in our organisations, I think if you actually wrote maybe a blog for us about that, the Vegan Society, on how the starting of it was very, obviously intersectional theory hasn't been as developed back then, but then you could write about how it had that flavour. I think that'd be really useful for trying to get the Vegan Society sort of online community more receptive to it, because I've had trouble in the past with there's been a lot of good people on there, and there's been a lot of, like, I posted once an article like 100 Black Vegans That Rock that like had so much like bile and everything thrown against it by white vegans saying the article was racist. Anyway, it was, I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it would be useful, to hear about that side of things. It would be useful for any like vegans of colour to write blogs for the Vegan Society explaining their points of view and in general. And if you do want to do that, web@vegansociety.com, like send me your submissions. And I think it'd be really useful to just get all these things out there so that the community can learn more about it as a whole, because we've got about like nearly 400,000 Facebook followers. So like there's a lot of people out there that we can potentially reach. It would be really good to hear all these different voices and try and change the minds of these people who are quite, some of them who can be pretty toxic.
It's hard when you've got, I was just going to say, I mean, in any movement, you're going to have some people that are more extreme than others and deal with things in a different way, and I guess you just have to kind of keep going with it the way you believe that is right, and just got to hope and just like not lose faith, I guess, and just power through.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, my name is Gayatri. I just want to say thank you for what you've been talking about, because I've been vegan for about 7.5 months, and I'm now making this link with feminism as well, which is sort of to me now, that I didn't think about it before. I obviously grew up in a culture where the feminine energy is oppressed and the feminine energy isn't valued, and I sort of lived with that my whole life. And so do you think this is about oppressing the feminine energy? Because obviously feminine energy can heal. The world that we're living in now with war and violence and oppression and so on, feminine energy can bring a lot of healing to that. So do you think this is about, the work that I do is all about energy medicine, and so I see things in a very energetic way, and how we create, I'm sorry this might be a bit off, but how we create morphic fields around certain things, which affect, it might not affect you personally, but the morphic field will affect you because you're within that energy. Does that make sense? So my question is this about oppressing all feminine energy in all its forms?
Let's take that.
Okay.
Well, I'm just going to go, yeah.
I mean, I think...
Sorry,
do you want to add anything to that?
Well, what's interesting to talk about feminine energy is because in my experience in the vegan movement, there tends to be, and I hope this isn't, obviously this is just a temporary thing, but there tends to be more women vegans than there are men. And I find myself sort of surrounded by really powerful women a lot, and actually it's amazing for female energy. So that's in a way also linked to the vegan movement. Like I live with lovely vegan women, and I work with a lot of amazing vegan women and things like that.
Thank you. Question at the front.
Hi. Sorry, my name's... No, sorry. I'm not apologising for myself. My name's Judy. I'm a nanny. I wasn't born in this house. I'm African. I apologise because I wasn't listening to any of your names when you were introducing yourself, and I got you two have gone to university, which I'm a high school dropout, so I can't relate.
I'm still at university.
Right. That's the thing.
I'm stuck there.
I've never stopped learning. I'm here because I can't stop learning. My question is, could you please repeat your names so that I don't go be the lady in the black top? And then I do have a question with regards to being a nanny, and I look after two girls who are Indian girls, and I'm from Africa where the culture is very different to the Indian culture. And then I take my girls horse riding, and horse riding is, the horses are there in paddocks. I was sitting there today looking at the horse riding going, these horses are here purely for these girls' entertainment. There were only girls riding, there was like 20 of them, and a very privileged thing was very expensive. I just felt so out of my depth. I started getting angry. I was like, well, these horses are here. Then how far do you take it? Their horses probably wouldn't have been bred, they wouldn't be alive. Oh, I don't know.
So your question's about horses?
Well, first of all, your name, sorry.
Sophie.
Ali. Hi, Ali.
Kate.
Hi, Kate. Thank you.
So my personal opinion when it comes to, well, I suppose you can go into it and link it with like keeping animals in general as pets, and that's a whole other thing. Horses, my mum is vegan, and she does have horses, and she kind of grew up horse riding, and then we moved back to countryside and she decided to get horses again, and I think it's the way we've domesticated these creatures, and basically there's nowhere for horses to live in the wild, sadly, really, in the UK. So they are domesticated.
Challenging, or taking them out on without actually riding them. I mean, it sounds silly, but from a sort of perspective, not actually getting on their back seems less dominant than taking them out for a walk or a trot, running with them, if you get what I mean. And so, I think from that perspective, obviously it's difficult, but I think that the act of actually riding them can be a very dominant and oppressive one.
Okay, thank you. Question? Yes?
So sort of to go back to some of the comments we talked about already, but a question kind of regarding what's maybe a more strategic way to advocate for a cause or kind of be an activist. And it relates to obviously this talk is a lot about kind of drawing comparisons with different oppressions of different groups. I think often then it can seem like a good idea when you're advocating against the oppression of one group to point out the similarities with the oppression of another group that perhaps the people you're talking to already oppose to kind of make that comparison. I was just wondering if you think that maybe that maybe that sometimes doesn't work either because it reminds people of ways in which different groups have already been kind of compared with animals in the past, non-human animals, in a way to sort of belittle them, and then that generates a negative reaction, or in a way in which you can be seen to be kind of instrumentalizing another oppression for your sort of political cause. So do you think there's a way to resolve that and make these comparisons in a way that doesn't cause that problem, or do you think it's maybe sometimes just best to avoid using it that way?
Okay.
I think it's a really difficult one because I think everybody is influenced by different things. So people, like you were saying about our vegan journeys and our feminist journeys, they're all different, they're all triggered by different things. So I think forms of activism, people take different forms of activism, and in a way there is a place for all those different kinds of forms of activism, because one person campaigning for veganism in a certain way, one person campaigning for feminism in a certain way, they will all influence different people, and in a way doing it differently will, in theory, like influence more people.
Yeah, I think it's, so I often might draw my own personal experience, being treated like, you know, as you being a non-binary woman, like might draw on that as, to use it as an example to compare to something else I might have said because it's my own lived experience, but I wouldn't then draw on another person's experience, which I have no experience of, to compare to. So I think that's the main issue when sort of comparing an animal's oppression to another. I think if it's your own, then that I think, because I might do this, I think there's like a sort of leeway there, you're relating it to your own personal experience and lived experience, but if you're just sort of making an off-colour remark that has nothing to do with your own lived experience and you're just comparing two different things, then it's quite a different situation.
Any other questions? No? I think that's Bernie, you want to ask? No? Oh, go for it.
What do you guys think of, you know, Instagram girls, like really beautiful, yoga, pretty girls that like basically use their bodies, but then they turn people vegan? Like, what do you guys think about that? Like, do you think, like, we're totally just saying, oh, they're so pretty, and like, what's the word, objectifying them? And like, how is that for like feminism and stuff? But it works. So what do you guys think?
I mean, I suppose it depends when you look at it, and I'm not saying it's for all of those Instagram girls. I know what I mean, I suppose. It's sort of, you know, those images, in a way you could see it as also that it's advertising a healthy lifestyle, because it's not just about sexualizing them, it's about I am like a healthy body and I'm like happy with my body. Because I think you get other girls who are doing it like yoga and turning people vegan that might not be stereotypically the ideal body or whatever it is, but they, of course, they're beautiful and they're just as healthy and happy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a problem, like, is it Freely the Banana Girl who was advocating not getting your period or something is like health, and that is a really unhealthy way to go about things. And I think a lot of these Instagram girls, as you say, like often they're white and very skinny and not necessarily promoting a healthy image, because they might be promoting some kind of like extreme diet and extreme body type, and also whiteness as well generally, which I think is really problematic. And so I think we need to all kind of like just sort of look at like exactly what they're promoting, and yeah, and again objectification might come into it, but again it's all wrapped up in intersectionality and how we're looking at it. So I think, I mean, obviously people, you know, it's a hard one, but I'd say that generally they can be promoting quite problematic things, and it's something to be aware of.
Thank you. So, yeah, the objectification is really difficult, because I totally agree with what you're saying, and like, is it a good message to be putting out there? But then on the other hand, you get feminists who will say like, so for as an example, like a woman who goes and does pole dancing, and that's really, only people initially might say that's really anti-feminist, and it's encouraging men to sexually objectify these women, which you can totally see that side of it. But then those women will say, I feel so empowered when I do this. This is my choice to do this. So you kind of have two sides.
It's difficult, because on the one hand, I would not dream of ever seeking to police how another woman decided to be physically themselves and communicate using their physicality. Yet that conversation about how, yes, for you this is meaning one thing, but connect, if you're going to connect that to feminism, then connect to the fact that doing this connects to other people's feminism as well, that it connects messages that mean and result in or contribute to processes that have different kinds of outcomes as well. So that just trying to move away from that idea that it is just about my experience of my body, how I display it. Yes, fine, that's for you to make that decision. It's not for somebody else to police it. It's not for me as another feminist to police it. But the encouragement of think about where you are within that network, within those connections, and what those things also do for your sisters who may end up experiencing that in other ways, and draw your conclusion on how best to proceed. considering that rather than just like isolation. But it's, yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question from the floor.
Yeah, so I think we should be able to debate in a friendly way because it's a polite atmosphere, so I'm not trying to be deliberate provocative, but it's also a feminist film festival, so we should, one of the big flashpoints in feminism at the moment is Nordic model or sex buyers law versus decriminalisation, which the Labour Party and Amnesty International are now advocating. So I can declare I'm a spokesperson for the Women's Equality Party and we advocate the Nordic model. There was a review this week of a book that Julie Bindel has just published about the sex trade and prostitution in the UK and internationally. And in the review of it, in the newspaper that I read, it talked about those countries such as Holland, where there's been decriminalisation, in Germany, and it described the conditions that the women were kept in, and it said white liberals would be up in arms if these were battery farmed chickens. And so, in a way, we touched on this in that part of the debate. So my question is not really about that debate, but the Nordic model versus decriminalisation. But you already touched on this in your reference to pole dancing. We seek to resolve some of those disputes, or to talk about that big dispute in feminism, which is also a dispute for men, who are the sex buyers, by looking in terms of autonomy and identity. Whereas for animals, we can't do it. How in the case of animals, for example, the horse that runs across the paddock when the rider comes, or the cow that is uncomfortable with very full, if you're breastfeeding, at a certain point your breasts become painful and you want the baby to take the milk out. The cow that comes over to the gate to get milked, even though it's by a machine. When making those difficult assessments about how we should relate to animals, for women in society, whatever their privilege or disempowerment, we try to use ideas of autonomy and choice. How can we is there any connection to be made then between women as humans in this society who can be facilitated to express their choice versus animals whose language we don't speak?
I think that's
Any of you? Go for it.
I think these are two very different points, because animals aren't able to consent. There's no way animals can consent to whatever we do to them, and because they don't have speech, we can't understand them. There's no consent there, and I feel like the idea of sex work should be seen from a completely workers' rights perspective, and I think whatever the majority of sex workers who generally advocate decriminalisation say that is best for their work, that is what we should be in solidarity with. But again, this all comes back to the problems of capitalism and how we should be anti-capitalist if we want to end things like the dangers within certain types of work, and also the complete industrialisation, and mechanisation of, like, for example, animal farming, and the way we treat animals in general, and how that's linked to the way our economic and the socio-economic situation currently exists. So I think that we can't say that women and animals is the same. It's just the same, because it's not. So I think we have to realise that women have choice as well, even if it's a very, very, very shit choice, or compared to animals who we can't consent. So I think, I'm not sure there's too many parallels to be made with that.
I think I see it very similarly, but almost on its head. It's that we can't understand. It's not that they can't consent. We can't understand on their terms. So we leave them be. It's not that they can't tell us, that they can't voice to us.
Yeah.
We do not have the means to understand their voice. So just conceptually and practically, leave them be. Don't bring them into your homes. Don't sit on their backs and try and pretend they're having fun. Don't eat them. Leave them out of our lives completely, because we cannot communicate with. We're humans. We're only really capable of communicating with other humans. Very often quite poorly as well. So those species who do not have the skill set, but we have that notion of ourselves as being brilliant and being top of the food chain, and that we are actually able to therefore know about, communicate with, be in charge of.